I want to tie a couple of topics into one because I think they do relate. So we're going through the chronology. So then ECW turns up on Monday Night Raw in 1997. ECW invades Monday Night Raw. And that's another example of this is different, this is new, this is fresh.
That's another example of the stain being a mark for ECW, is what it was.
But then, on March the 3rd, 1997...
and don't call Heyman now and tell him Cornette was blistering. It was just another example of guys being ended up crippled and hurt and having painkiller problems because they did too much. It was completely unbelievable for a bunch of those wise asses up in Philadelphia that cheered at the hunter that shot Bambi's mother.
Somebody
and
really
they had
liked
some
that.
great wrestling, and they also did some stupid shit that the human body should not do, and then they couldn't top it, and that's the problem. But otherwise than that, it was wonderful and everybody was great.
And but the next week, WWF for the first time aired Monday Night Raw from Germany. It was a taped show, and this is potentially where you were taken over the edge, I guess, because Vince McMahon decides at that point he wants some different opinions. He wants to broaden the horizons of the WWF, and Vince Russo becomes involved. Vince Russo, who is not here tonight, sadly. But then it all leads to WrestleMania 13. And the reason that I tie all these topics together and we get to WrestleMania 13 is that it seemed from WrestleMania 12 like we were going to get Bret and Shawn, the rematch at WrestleMania 13, but the plans changed. Everything seemed to just go haywire.
Was that when he lost his smile or just when he lost his balls?
So I guess
you actually can tell whose side I was on in that thing. Because
so my long-winded question, and feel free to take it on whatever tangent you choose, is all these series of events, this is in a 1-month period. ECW invade, Germany taped Raw that doesn't do well in the ratings, and WrestleMania 13 with the Bret Hart-Steve Austin match that wasn't planned, I guess, for that long, but eventually became the plan and became your favorite WWF match. What are your memories of that whole time period and all of those changes happening so quickly?
Jared, would you agree? Vince was grasping because I always thought, and actually I was so close to it at that point, I was hearing it all the time every week. Oh, we got to do something, we got to do this, we got to do that. They're beating us, they're taking our talent or whatever. The guys that left, I think they should have gone. Because that way that opened the door for the young guys to come up and get over that the Austins and the Rocks and etc. Secondly, I think that if Vince had just calmed down a little bit and continued to do the best show he could, the one thing is it got us out of the goons and the plumbers and the bull like that, because he was always all over those comedy gimmicks. And Bruce Pritchard to this day, well, everybody has to have a character so that people can identify with them. They can't just go out and be a wrestler. Of course I identify with the goon with the hockey skates on his boots and T.L. Hopper with the plunger. And it was, everything had to be comedy funny because Vince had, for the first 8 years of its existence, WCW was not a threat. And then when Bischoff accidentally blurted something out and got him to spend some money, it became a threat, and instead of just calmly trying to do the best job he could and run his business, because the office was always more organized, the production company, the studio was always network quality and so much better than WCW's production. Everything about the company except the wrestling product was so much more professional in every way. It's just that they got the WCW brain trust to be a little bit more real and a little bit more credible instead of this hokey Saturday morning 80s cartoon that Vince had success with in the 80s. If he'd have gone about just doing his business instead of trying the shotgun approach where you throw everything on the wall and see if it sticks, Bischoff was going to burn out because he signed all those guys to ludicrous money. They had to sell out every night to make a profit. As soon as business went down, the same fate was going to happen, because Eric Bischoff, I think, even said one time on one of the promos that he did, he didn't know very much about anything about the wrestling business, but he knew a little bit about everything, about television or production or talent or whatever. He knew a little bit about it. He knew more about it than the WCW brain trust, the executives at TBS. He was able to convince them that he wasn't a wrestling person, and that's who they trusted. The guy that knew the least about it, besides Jim Herd, than anybody that ever been probably in a position, but they trusted him because he wasn't a wrestling guy.
That's why I didn't get that job.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I interviewed for the job, but, you know, after I was so closely aligned with Cowboy, Bill Watts, that, you know, and I'd been there a lot longer than Bill. Bill was only passed through. I got there from the get-go. And I really would like to have had the opportunity to have that role, because obviously it's good for your resume, it's good for your bank account, there's a lot of wins there. But one of the reasons that Eric got the job, hey, look, they beat us 83 weeks in a row in the ratings, so he did a hell of a job there for a while. There's no doubt about it. They made a lot of money at that company for a while. It was the fact that he sold Turner on the fact that he was a television guy, not a wrestling guy. And I'm not sure he didn't bring me up, but I was perceived as a wrestling guy. So that being a wrestling, it's funny how it works out sometimes in your lifetime. I've had opportunities to do mainstream sports that I didn't get over the hump back in the day because I was a wrestling guy. Then I didn't get a wrestling job because I was a wrestling guy. So you can go crazy about this stuff, right? So I just figured, what the hell? I don't care. I'm going to be me for whatever that's worth, good, bad, or indifferent. Just be yourself, be unique, and I never played the role of a wrestling announcer. I think that's why Lawler and I worked so well in the Attitude Era, is that we never rehearsed. He would have walked off the job if he'd had to rehearse. He hated it. So we didn't rehearse. We didn't know the finishes.
He didn't write his own TV till 15 minutes before we went on the air live in Memphis. Why is he going to rehearse somebody else's?
There you go. So it worked because we were different, we were unique, and we weren't playing characters. So, but I just, that whole Attitude Era thing was really amazing. But I also believe this. Here's one of the misnomers, guys. You see somebody online, and I get this a lot. It don't make error because I've already answered them. You know, it's like if WWE would go back to the Attitude Era presentation, they would automatically be successful. Well, that's crazy. That makes no sense. Are you kidding me? How old are you, 8? You really figure that's the way it's going to be? Yeah, if you could replicate, yeah, so who's going to play the role of Steve Austin? Oh, we ain't got that. Okay, who's going to be your 6'5", 275-pound, unique, ethnically unique man that women and men both like? Dwayne Johnson. Well, we ain't got anybody who can do that either. How about this young 6'10" babyface that has this cool gimmick, The Undertaker? Got anybody? Ain't got him either. So that's the deal. Talent's what it's all boils down to.
And to be honest, give him his credit. Vince, after the Montreal deal, thought he was going to be the babyface. Go back and watch the tapes for the 2 weeks afterwards. Thought he was going to be the babyface. Oh, the fans will all side with me because I did what I had to do. He was the greatest heel in the modern history of wrestling because that's Vince.
Without a doubt.
Take this job, and then you got Austin. Take the job and shove it, and there you go. And the rest of it, write it Porky Pig and Bugs Bunny. Blow me, blow me, blow me, because that's going to draw the fucking money. That's as far as you needed to go, right? And it was all by accident. It wasn't planned, as many of the great things that draw money. But we're jumping ahead of ourselves.
Think about your favorite football team, and here's why they were good. They got players. Players equate to success. And in wrestling, it's not a great creative idea. It's about the talent have got to execute the ideas. A smart booker will not book what he likes. He will book what the talent can execute to that booker's acceptance level. Now think about that. You don't do what you like if your roster isn't able to pull it off. And I think that's kind of what we were able to do in the Attitude Era.
How many times have you been trying to book a card and you said, boy, so-and-so's my hottest babyface, so-and-so's my hottest heel, but God, that match would stink. I got to do something else. Put them in a tag or keep them apart or whatever. That's the way it goes sometimes. Sometimes you can't make that recipe because the cake won't rise.
So another couple of things that you were very influential in, and I think you deserve to get the credit for it tonight, is Mick Foley. When he came to the WWF, he was Mankind, but then in '97 you did these promos with him, the sit-down interviews, where it ended up that he gave you the mandible claw. And then a couple of months after that, Rocky Maivia, who had not been connecting as a babyface, turned heel on August 11th in 1997. So you had these two guys. One of them was now opening up and showing you, parts of his past and all this stuff. And then another guy would become The Rock, one of the biggest stars in wrestling history. Talk a little bit about those two guys and evolving their characters to become the success that they did.
I think Mick Foley probably has more in common with all of us here tonight than probably anybody I ever hired on the roster, with the exception maybe of John Cena. The only other major star that knew the WWF history and trivia better than some of those guys was Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson had it down pat, man. He was a massive wrestling fan and could quote things chapter and verse. Foley was an overachiever, a very bright guy, had tried to be hired in WWE 3 or 4 times, been turned down. He'd had a few tryout matches. And I knew him from WCW because I helped facilitate him coming there. I liked him, and we had some issues in our locker room. See, people understand a lot of why people are hired and why they're so valuable. When you have an immature locker room, or you have a locker room where you've got a couple of incumbents that are not great citizens and they're bad influences on your younger talents, you really need some stability in your locker room. And it's not that Mick was going to be the guy. He was going to be a guy that was very valuable in that regard. So I knew that he was not a drug guy. He was not a boozer. He was not going to flunk any tests. He was going to give us a great effort. He could work heel or babyface. But the main thing I knew...
He would crawl across hell with gasoline britches on to get to a show. You never had to worry about Mick.
Well, I needed a heel to work with Undertaker because I was a booker. I'm booking all the house shows. So that tells you 2 things. The old wrestlers that became bookers made you think that it was the hardest job in the world. My God, it's just nobody else could do this but me or a guy like me. Come on, get out. If you got a good imagination and you use logic and common sense and you book things that as a fan you'd like to see, there you go. So Mick, I needed a heel to work with Taker. When you have I learned this from Bill Watts. Bill Watts was a 300-pound, 6'3", 300-pound baby face. And he always was very careful in the heels that he brought in because they had to be so good, because if Bill was going to sell, which is imperative, believe it or not, selling is imperative to the success of any wrestling match, he knew that he had to, he had to have a guy in the ring with him that people believe could kick Bill's ass. So I had to have a heel that could work with Taker that could match up with him. So I go to Taker. He knows Mick. He worked with him in WCW. He liked him. Everybody liked Mick. He's a good hand. He can do whatever you need, brawl, wrestle, whatever. So I go to Vince. He turned me down. And so I was persistent. He said, here's what I'm going to do, JR. He said, you're new on this job. I'm going to let you hire Mick so you'll understand what it's like to get your heart broken. And he meant that. Here's the deal. You see, there'll be rumblings. Somebody will laugh like, oh, he's an evil guy. Someone will go, oh. There's a whole lot of different emotions there because you don't know Vince. You think you do, but you really don't. He was trying to protect me from getting gut and quartered by somebody I really, truly believed in that was going to fart and fail. And I didn't believe Foley was going to fail. And luckily he didn't. So we have Foley come in, and Foley and I are doing an interview, like sitting here like these guys in a little studio. It's dark back there, kind of like you guys out there can barely see you. And Vince snuck in and was watching. And I remember we did this interview all extemporaneously, no script, no writers. Not one writer was there that I can remember. TV crew, Foley and me, that's it. But I knew what Vince wanted and what we talked about booking-wise. So you do the logical interview. No rehearsal, just sit down and do it. And Vince stuck in after work, and it's late. He comes in, and we didn't know he was there. And we had a break like a bathroom break or a tape change or something. So we cut, and we're going to finish, and we hear these hands clapping. It's the boss. He likes us. And for Mick, that was for me, it was cool too, don't get me wrong. But for Mick, after being turned down, and then kind of being on a flyer, maybe he may get there, he may get over, he may not, probably won't. He might break your heart, JR, type deal. Mick, it was like he was stamped, accepted. So I felt good for him on that deal. So that was Mick's thing. And Mick, of course, went all through all his incarnations, and now he's the Raw general manager and so forth and so on. So he was really he's done amazingly well. And same thing with writing his book. I was very lucky because being his boss and doing the payoffs and doing the booking, I got to read his book, his first book, page by page as it was being written, longhand. And it was just, I read about 10 pages, and I'm thinking, this is the most magnificent thing on wrestling I have ever read in my life. And I'm really surprised that somebody hasn't made a movie about it, quite frankly. But nonetheless, Mick is ultra talented. Who was the other guy you asked about?
And then we had The Rock,
Rock.
Rocky Maivia.
Let me say one thing really quickly about Mick also. It's been a blessing and a curse. He got over so strong, and he's become the idol of so many of the younger generation of wrestlers who think that he got over by taking those bumps. Mick had an unorthodox body and an unorthodox look. He got noticed for taking the bumps. He actually got noticed more by the promoters and bookers for taking the bumps than he did really by the fans. But everybody who's tried to copy him, think about this. They couldn't cut the promo. They didn't have the psychology. They also weren't a person that, regardless of whether he was Mankind or Mick Foley or Dude Love or Cactus Jack, you liked that guy, right? When you watch him on TV, you like that. You don't he's not necessarily your hero. You like him as a friend. That's something that he had that almost nobody has, and you can't buy it or borrow it. You have to have it. And when he was Dude Love one time, he said, I feel like I'm cheating the fans, Corny, because I'm not doing the bumps. I'm not taking it. It had gotten to the point where I told him, I said, Cactus, now the people like you so much when you take those bumps, they don't pop and go, wow, they go, oh, I hope he didn't hurt himself. It was almost the point where they had sympathy in the wrong way. They didn't want to see that happen to a friend of theirs. And that's natural. So he wasn't just a one-dimensional hardcore guy with thumbtacks and his ear gone. He had psychology. He was one of the best promos in the business. He was a likable guy, and it translated through the TV screen. You could tell he was somebody you wanted to be your friend. And the people who've just copied the bumps, they don't get why Mick Foley was so over. And
I mean, I want to get through all this stuff before these people need to go tonight. But we'll get towards the big thing that I guess was part of the Attitude Era creation. Then Raw goes to Madison Square Garden. First time Raw's went to Madison Square Garden ever. Steve Austin stunners Vince McMahon for the first time. And backstage, the contract between Bret Hart and Vince McMahon is coming to an end. Then the next month, you start cutting shoot promos on Raw when, the night after Brian Pillman had passed away and Vince is doing the interview with
Were they really shoot promos?
Yeah, well, the first one, actually, they really were, to be quite honest with you, because they didn't, do you even remember why that Vince had me do the first one?
I don't remember what I had for breakfast. Nando's.
There you go. The first Cornette's commentary was because Kevin Kelly was doing the Bite This show on WWF.com back when nobody listened to audio on the internet. Like 6 people and a burglar breaking into somebody's house, right? We're listening to this thing. And they said, we can't get anybody else to do it. Will you come on one week? And Nash and Hall and those guys had just did the parody of the Horsemen, who were friends of mine. And I knew that's the way they felt. I always thought that whole Degeneration X thing, I'm sorry if you liked it. I thought it was childish. They were kids on the playground pulling their pants down, waving their willy around. They were jacking off at the expense of other talent that couldn't get over because their little treehouse boys club called the Clique. I'm sorry, this is not news the way I felt this way. So anyway, Kevin Kelly asked me about it, and I cut a promo on it. And then Vince McMahon calls me like 2 days later. He said, "What did you say on the internet?" I said, "Oh, they said nobody was listening." He said, no, we got more feedback on that show than all the other internet shows we've ever done put together by far. I want you to say it on Raw. You want me to say what I said on Raw? He said, yes, just call Jerry McDevitt, the lawyer, and run it by him and make sure we won't get sued for slander or whatever, and then do it. So I did it. And everybody went nuts, including me, because I'm like, what? How the f*** is this going to sell any tickets, right? And so then they wanted me to do more, like on Phil Muchnick, the New York Post columnist. Easy, I think he's a I'll cut a promo on him. The only times that I've ever used a teleprompter, because it was my words, but I had to make sure we wouldn't get sued, so I had to clear everything with a lawyer, and sometimes I do get carried away. So I wrote my own had him put it on the teleprompter, and then I read it. The teleprompter guy said, "I've never had to turn this thing this fast before." So that's what those were, but there were no point to them. They weren't going to lead to anything. It wasn't going to sell any tickets. It was just me venting about what I really meant. And then the boys started getting hot because I was knocking the company.
The shoot thing, though, Kenny, was my point there earlier, was that if in the context of a pro wrestling world, in the context of it being produced, formatted, is it really a shoot? Well, what Corny said, he believed. He gave his opinion. But I always believed that a shoot was spontaneous, unrehearsed, unplanned. That to me, that's what a shoot is.